Some silences speak louder than words, and she just left me speechless. The first time our paths truly crossed, it wasn't dramatic or cinematic. It was subtle, almost like the world had decided to pause for a single heartbeat. He noticed her first without thinking, drawn not just by her appearance, but by the quiet confidence that seemed to radiate effortlessly from her. She was 40 years old, an American woman with long black hair cascading down her shoulders, her lightly tanned skin catching the soft morning light. Her dark brown eyes held a depth that immediately pulled him in, framed by laugh lines that suggested a life well lived, but not without challenges. She was dressed simply, a fitted cream blouse and navy trousers. Yet the way she carried herself made even simplicity feel elegant. He, a 23-year-old man, felt the familiar stirrings of curiosity, tempered by hesitation. The age difference wasn't just a number. It was a barrier built of experience, expectation, and the subtle judgments of the world around them. And yet, he couldn't look away. He noticed how her fingers brushed a stray strand of hair behind her ear, the almost imperceptible tilt of her head, as if she were listening to something only she could hear. Their first interaction was brief, a polite exchange of words over shared work or circumstance, but it left a lingering warmth. He felt the magnetic pull of her presence, the way her energy seemed to fill the space around her. She smiled, and it wasn't just a smile. It was a quiet acknowledgement, a subtle invitation to step closer to a world he didn't yet fully understand. There was a vulnerability hidden beneath her poise, a quiet admission that life had taught her patience, but maybe also that she was ready to feel something again. He became hyper-aware of the small, unspoken details, the way her hand rested lightly on the table, fingers curling slightly as if testing gravity, the soft cadence of her laughter, not loud, but resonant enough to echo in the corners of his mind, the warmth that radiated from her when she leaned in during conversation, a subtle but deliberate closeness that invited comfort. Emotionally, he wrestled with the tension of wanting to know her more and respecting the silent boundaries that age and life experience implied. Every glance she offered, every brief touch of her hand as she passed a notebook or adjusted a chair, was imbued with meaning he could almost, but not entirely, decode. It was the start of a slow burn, a dance of observation and restraint, where emotions whispered in the spaces between words. By the end of that first encounter, he was left with a feeling that neither of them could articulate. The silence that followed carried weight, a shared understanding that something unspoken had begun. In that quiet, he realized he had glimpsed not just a woman, but a depth of presence and emotion that could reshape his perception of connection. And in that very moment, he knew this wasn't fleeting. It was the beginning of a story neither of them could ignore, a delicate tension that would build quietly, beautifully, and undeniably. The second encounter felt heavier, though nothing about it seemed forced. He noticed her before she spoke, her presence settling into the room like sunlight through a window. She was a 40-year-old American woman, her long black hair glinting softly in the afternoon light, wearing a fitted olive green blouse and beige skirt that emphasized her graceful posture. Her lightly tanned skin and subtle freckles caught his attention, while the soft laugh lines at the corners of her eyes made her warmth approachable. She exuded a quiet confidence, but in the pauses between her words, there was vulnerability, a subtle hint that she carried unspoken stories. He, a 23-year-old man, found himself drawn to the details. The way she tilted her head slightly when listening, the faint, almost imperceptible lift of her eyebrows when curious, the delicate brush of her fingers along the edge of a notebook. He realized he was watching not just her actions, but the spaces in between, the silence that spoke louder than words, the way her presence made the air feel charged, almost electric. Every movement seemed purposeful, yet effortless, an unspoken invitation to notice, to linger, to understand. Their conversation was gentle, measured. Words were exchanged, but it was the pauses between them that mattered most. A shared laugh, a fleeting look, the subtle closeness when reaching for the same object. It all carried weight. He became acutely aware of the warmth radiating from her when she leaned slightly closer, the way her voice lowered just enough to make him strain to catch every word. The emotional tension wasn't loud or dramatic. It was intimate, a quiet pull between two people learning to navigate the space of mutual attraction and respect. Emotionally, he felt both exhilarated and cautious. He wanted to reach out, to bridge the gap between curiosity and connection, but the awareness of their age difference and the life experiences it represented kept him measured. Yet, every glance she gave, every soft smile, seemed to speak directly to him, hinting at a desire to be understood, to be seen in a way no one else had. Her confidence didn't intimidate, it intrigued him. Her vulnerability didn't weaken her, it drew him closer. As the encounter drew to a close, he realized that the tension between them had thickened, not with force, but with subtle gravity. He left with the feeling that their connection wasn't accidental. The unspoken promise of more lingered in the space between them, the potential for intimacy and understanding growing quietly, patiently. Even as the room emptied and the sound of life resumed around him, he carried with him the memory of her gaze, the warmth of her presence, and the thrilling uncertainty of what might unfold. By the end of the day, he knew this wasn't a fleeting curiosity. It was a slow, steady pull, a magnetic current neither of them fully understood yet, but one that would guide the next steps of their story. The world outside could continue in its usual rhythm, but between them, something new and quietly intense had begun. The next meeting felt different, charged, almost tangible, though nothing had been spoken yet. He noticed her the moment he entered the room. A 40-year-old American Caucasian woman with long, flowing black hair, elegantly dressed in a cream blouse and tailored navy pants, standing near the window. The morning sunlight caught the subtle freckles on her lightly tanned skin and highlighted the gentle lines around her dark brown eyes, giving her a presence that was both graceful and grounded. Her posture was relaxed but commanding, a quiet reminder that she carried herself with both maturity and care. He, a 23-year-old man, felt a familiar tug in his chest, the magnetic pull he couldn't yet name. She didn't rush to greet him, yet the brief glance she gave was enough to make the air feel warmer, closer. Her slight, almost shy smile hinted at familiarity and curiosity. Every detail drew his attention. The soft brush of her hand against the edge of her desk, the delicate way she leaned back in her chair, the subtle way her fingers fidgeted with a silver bracelet. Each movement seemed both casual and meaningful, like a language only he was beginning to understand. Words came slowly, but each one felt weighty, chosen, layered with unspoken meaning. Their conversation navigated mundane topics, yet beneath the surface there was a rhythm, a subtle dance of glances, pauses, and the soft echo of shared laughter. He realized he was not just hearing her words, but absorbing the space she occupied, the warmth she radiated, the sense of calm authority she carried without effort. Every time their hands brushed over a book or a pen, there was a brief shock, a quiet acknowledgement of proximity and possibility. Emotionally, he was caught in a wave of tension and admiration. Her age and experience were not obstacles, but elements that made her intriguing, a depth he had not encountered before. He noticed the softness in her voice, the fleeting vulnerability in her expressions, the way her confident exterior softened when she laughed or lowered her gaze. She seemed aware of the effect she had, but didn't wield it consciously. It was natural, unforced, intimate in its authenticity. By the time their meeting ended, a subtle transformation had occurred. The energy between them had grown, almost imperceptibly, yet undeniably. He left feeling a mixture of anticipation and hesitation, the kind that prickles at the back of the neck and quickens the pulse. It wasn't a need or a desire that screamed for attention. It was a quiet pull, a magnetic current that promised depth, connection, and perhaps something more complicated and beautiful. He realized, as he walked away, that this wasn't about fleeting attraction. It was about understanding, about the thrill of discovering someone layer by layer, and the gentle, persistent tension of unspoken possibilities. Between them, the silence now carried meaning. Every look, every small gesture became a conversation of its own. And he knew, deep down, that their story was only just beginning, one that would unfold slowly, patiently, with each encounter leaving them both more aware, more connected, and more entangled in the quiet, magnetic tension that neither could deny. The following week brought an unexpected invitation. He found himself standing outside the small cafe she had mentioned in passing, a cozy corner bathed in soft morning light, with the scent of freshly brewed coffee mingling with the faint aroma of baked pastries. The 40-year-old American Latino woman was already there, sitting by the window. Her long black hair cascaded over her shoulders, catching the sunlight, framing her face in a way that made her seem almost ethereal. She wore a soft, pastel blouse tucked neatly into high-waisted trousers, a combination that emphasized both her elegance and approachability. Her lightly tanned skin and subtle freckles reflected a warmth that made her presence immediately comforting. As he approached, she looked up, her dark brown eyes meeting his with an intensity that made the rest of the cafe blur into insignificance. There was a quiet, magnetic tension in the way she held her gaze, a balance of curiosity, playfulness, and something unspoken, an invitation without words. He felt his heartbeat quicken, a gentle warmth spreading through his chest as he slid into the chair opposite her. The conversation started lightly, brushing over trivial topics, favorite books, weekend routines, but each exchange carried layers beneath the surface. The way she laughed, tilting her head slightly, and the soft brush of her fingers against the table as she gestured sent small, electrifying shivers through him. Every movement, every glance seemed deliberate and yet effortless, as if the room itself conspired to draw them closer. As they talked, subtle physical closeness grew. Their knees brushed under the table, accidental but undeniable. When she reached for her cup, her hand lingered a moment longer than necessary near his, the warmth radiating through the brief touch. He felt the thrill of a shared, silent understanding, that something more than friendship existed, delicate yet undeniable. It was not urgency that defined the moment, but a slow, intoxicating build of connection. Emotionally, he was unmoored and exhilarated. He noticed the small, intimate details, the slight smile lines at the corners of her eyes, the quiet strength in her posture, the warmth of her voice when she leaned closer to emphasize a point. She was confident, experienced, yet there was a vulnerability hidden beneath her composed exterior, a vulnerability that called to his protective instincts, that made every pause, every look, every subtle gesture feel charged with meaning. By the end of their meeting, time seemed to have both collapsed and expanded. He walked out into the sunlit street, feeling a lingering heat from her presence, a quiet ache of anticipation. The encounter had deepened something unspoken between them, a slow but steady pull that promised more. More conversation, more shared moments, more silent understanding. The world felt sharper, brighter, and yet infinitely more complicated, as if their story had quietly begun to write itself in gestures, glances, and the tender tension of proximity. In that brief morning together, he realized that the connection they shared was not fleeting. It was a slow-burn intimacy, subtle yet potent, a quiet force that was steadily pulling them towards something neither fully understood, but both were beginning to crave. And he knew, as he watched her silhouette fade from the window, that this moment was only the beginning, the first ripple in a wave that would inevitably grow stronger. The next encounter was unexpected, yet inevitable. He found himself walking through the park on a warm afternoon, sunlight filtering through the leaves and casting playful patterns on the pathway. She was already there, sitting on a weathered wooden bench, her 40-year-old American Caucasian beauty perfectly at ease amidst the natural surroundings. Her long black hair shimmered in the dappled sunlight, soft laugh lines and subtle freckles lending warmth to her graceful, mature face. She wore a flowing sundress in a muted blue, the fabric moving gently in a breeze, and the curve of her figure accentuated in a way that was elegant without being demanding of attention. Her dark brown eyes lit up as she noticed him, the smile that followed carrying the quiet confidence and unspoken emotion that had become familiar to him. As he approached, she shifted slightly, a subtle, deliberate movement that drew him closer without a word. When he sat beside her, the space between them seemed charged with anticipation. The warmth of the sunlight mingled with the warmth of proximity, and he felt a gentle flutter, an awareness of her presence that made the world around them fade into soft focus. Their conversation started cautiously, words flowing easily, yet every phrase carried depth, layered meanings that hovered beneath casual pleasantries. She laughed softly, the sound rich and genuine, her hand brushing momentarily against his as she adjusted the folds of her dress. The brief contact sent a shiver through him, the slow, steady pull between them growing impossible to ignore. They walked along the tree-lined path, afterward, steps almost synchronizing naturally. Occasionally, their arms brushed, accidental touches lingering just long enough to feel intimate. The subtle scent of her perfume, a blend of jasmine and something uniquely her, lingered in his senses, mingling with the earthy smell of the park. He noticed the grace in her movements, the way she carried herself with calm assurance, yet a quiet vulnerability peeked through whenever her gaze faltered or her smile softened. It was a paradox that captivated him. Confidence intertwined with tender openness, age paired with a timeless allure that made each moment magnetic. The conversation took a deeper turn as they sat by the small fountain, water sparkling in the afternoon sun. She shared snippets of her past, carefully chosen stories that hinted at struggles and triumphs, victories and regrets. His eyes traced the subtle lines of expression on her face, the slight crinkle near her eyes when she smiled, the delicate tension in her lips when she recalled a bittersweet memory. Each detail drew him closer emotionally, the connection between them intensifying with every shared revelation. By the end of the afternoon, a gentle silence fell, comfortable yet loaded with unspoken meaning. Their proximity felt natural, almost inevitable, the slow-burn tension between them stretching deliciously. When she finally stood to leave, their hands brushed again, a fleeting touch, yet enough to linger in his mind long after she walked away. He remained seated on the bench, watching the sunlight play across the path she had just walked, realizing more clearly than ever that the bond forming between them was no fleeting encounter. It was a deepening, a steady crescendo of emotional intimacy, a quiet pull that neither time nor distance could diminish. And as he rose to leave, he felt the unmistakable certainty that this was far from over. Their connection, subtle yet powerful, was growing stronger, setting the stage for moments yet to come, with emotions stretching taut, waiting for the next encounter to unravel them. The next encounter carried a different weight, almost charged with unspoken anticipation. He arrived at the small, sunlit cafe, the kind where afternoon light streamed through tall windows, catching the dust motes in golden beams. There she was, the 40-year-old American Latina woman with long black hair, seated at a corner table. Her presence seemed to transform the space. The graceful posture, the slight smile lines at the corners of her eyes, the curve of her figure that suggested both elegance and confidence. She wore a light, earth-toned blouse and tailored trousers, subtle sophistication in every line, her dark brown eyes scanning the pages of a book but lifting instantly when she noticed him. As he approached, the casual smile she offered was layered with something more, a quiet warmth, a flicker of anticipation. Sitting across from her, the air between them seemed to thicken, a gentle tension pulling at the edges of conversation. Their words began cautiously, small talk acting as a bridge to something deeper. Each gesture carried meaning, her fingers brushing against the rim of her coffee cup, a subtle lean toward him when he laughed, the occasional glint of amusement in her eyes when their observations aligned perfectly. The tactile presence of someone so attuned, so aware, created a gentle ache of longing, tempered by the patience of slow-burn discovery. They spoke about life in ways that felt intimate without exposure, carefully revealing parts of themselves like a painter adding layers to a canvas. The conversation turned to dreams and regrets, fears and small victories. He noticed how her laughter softened the edges of tension, the slight crinkle at the corners of her eyes emphasizing the warmth in her expression. When their hands brushed across the table, the contact was fleeting but magnetic, a simple touch igniting awareness of the space between them, of the closeness that seemed both natural and forbidden. The sunlight highlighted the subtle contours of her face, the lightly tanned skin, the graceful posture, all merging into a presence that was both commanding and tender. As the afternoon wore on, the world outside the cafe seemed to fade, leaving only the quiet intimacy of shared space. They both leaned in, voices lowering, the subtle rhythm of breathing and laughter creating an almost hypnotic harmony. She tilted her head slightly, a gesture both vulnerable and inviting, and he found himself caught in the gentle gravity of her attention. Each glance held weight, each pause carried unspoken meaning, the slow dance of emotion continuing without haste. When it was time to leave, they walked side by side, the sun casting long shadows on the sidewalk. Occasional brushes of arms, the soft sway of movement in sync, the warmth of presence without words. It was a quiet symphony of connection. Her smile lingered in his mind, her gaze a tether he couldn't pull away from. As she paused to wave goodbye, the distance between them felt charged, a bridge waiting to be crossed but not yet traversed. Walking away, he sensed the pull of inevitability. The bond had grown stronger, richer, impossible to ignore. The tension between them, slow and deliberate, had evolved into a magnetic force, and he knew that the next encounter would be a turning point, one where emotions might finally spill over the careful boundaries they had both maintained. The anticipation hung like warm sunlight on his skin, promising a crescendo of connection yet to come. The final encounter unfolded with a quiet inevitability, as if the universe had conspired to bring them together again. He arrived at her suburban home in the late afternoon, the golden light of early evening spilling across the neatly manicured lawn. The 40-year-old American Caucasian woman, her long black hair cascading over her shoulders, stood at the doorway, wearing a soft lavender blouse and fitted jeans that complemented her graceful, curvy figure. Her lightly tanned skin glowed in the sunlight, subtle freckles dancing across the bridge of her nose, and her dark brown eyes held that familiar mix of warmth and intensity that had been pulling at him since the first encounter. As he stepped closer, their eyes met, and the unspoken weight between them was palpable. She smiled, a slow, genuine curve of her lips that made the subtle laugh lines at the corners of her eyes more pronounced, a testament to her mature, confident beauty. Her presence exuded both strength and vulnerability, a combination that had captivated him from the start. They greeted each other with a soft, lingering hug, her arms settling around his back, the slight pressure steadying him, grounding him in the shared intimacy of the moment. Inside, the home was bathed in warm evening light, the golden hue reflecting off the wooden floors and cozy furnishings. They sat close on the couch, knees occasionally brushing, hands occasionally meeting in gentle, deliberate touches. Conversation flowed effortlessly, deeper now, filled with honesty and vulnerability. They spoke of past regrets, fears, and quiet hopes for the future. Each revelation met with a nod, a reassuring glance, a hand resting on his arm. The emotional walls they had both maintained were dissolving, replaced by trust and connection. At one point, she reached over, tucking a loose strand of hair behind his ear, her fingers grazing his cheek, the warmth of her touch lingering longer than necessary. The world outside the window, the hum of distant traffic, the golden light fading into dusk, seemed to disappear, leaving only the quiet intimacy of their shared space. The magnetic pull between them had become undeniable, but it was still tempered by restraint, the slow burn of their connection savoring each fleeting moment. As the evening deepened, she leaned her head lightly against his shoulder, a gesture that spoke volumes without a single word. He could feel the gentle rise and fall of her breath, the steady heartbeat beneath her blouse, and the quiet reassurance of her presence. Their hands intertwined naturally, fingers threading together with a soft certainty. Laughter and small smiles punctuated the silence, each one deepening the emotional bond they had carefully nurtured. By the time the night fully set in, the warmth between them had transformed into a sense of belonging. No dramatic confessions or sudden declarations were needed. The subtle, meaningful touches, the lingering glances, the gentle reassurance of presence had spoken louder than any words ever could. As they parted that evening, there was a mutual understanding. Whatever the future held, the connection they shared was rare, profound, and enduring. The story concluded not with a flourish, but with the soft promise of continuity, the quiet satisfaction of a slow-burn romance that had been worth every hesitant step, every lingering glance, and every moment of tension. It was a journey of patience, trust, and intimacy, leaving the audience with a warm sense of closure and a lingering memory of two hearts discovering each other in perfect harmony.